Let me get this sent.
Oh, I see Daily Evolver is broadcasting now. Isn't that something? I hadn't seen that before. Hey, everybody. Jeff Salzmann here, and welcome to the Daily Evolver. And a special welcome to those of you who are tuning in live and hanging in there because Tuesday, it looked like I blew you off, but I was actually here and I got all screwed up with the tech. But at any rate, it's good to be back and good to be with you. And today, I'm psyched to have my buddy and integral comrade in arms with me today, Corey DeVos, the editor-in-chief of Integral Life.
Hey, dude.
Hey, dude. How you doing?
Oh, it's awesome to be here.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you.
It's like a return to source.
Yeah. Well, you have, it's because of you and Integral Live, Integral Life being the big portal, Integral Live being your live webcast station.
Yep.
It's because of that I do this live. I do it through that. And it's really been such a, really nice collaboration. So
it really has.
Really,
it really
great
has.
to have you back on here.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me.
And one of the reasons I wanted to have you back on here is because I think you're doing some really interesting stuff at Integral Life, and I want to do a fucking infomercial.
Cool.
I mean, I want people to see what's going on there and see the value of it so that they will become members if they're not already and live an upright life where you pay for what you get. and that's okay. And I could say that because I'm not getting any benefit from any of it financially, but I'm getting all kinds of non-financial benefits. Anyway, so one of the things that I noticed that you posted on Integral Life, and it's actually just points to a bigger issue or a bigger moment, if you will, in the integral scene, and that is the passing of Father Thomas Keating.
Yeah.
Who was a dear friend of Ken's, and you posted a beautiful letter that Ken wrote Father Thomas before he died. So to me, it was a wonderful lesson. And tell the person you love them before their eulogy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
yeah, and it was a beautiful letter. It was absolutely gorgeous. And first off, Father Thomas passing is, I think all of us are in very deep mourning. I mean, the guy made it to 95 years old. You can't say he didn't have a pretty good run.
Yeah.
And he's been diminishing for a while now, and even still, his passing just feels, Ken used the word devastating.
Yeah.
And that, I thought that was apt. It feels absolutely devastating because there's no one else who could, possibly, wear that collar. He was an amazing human being.
Yeah. So I'm sharing the one paragraph that touched me. Are you seeing it in the share screen?
Yep, yeah, I see that.
Where Ken writes, there to Father Thomas, there are few lives I can think of that have been as truly, integrally, authentically engaged. And humanity as a whole is just that much closer to a genuine realization of God because of you. Bless you, bless you, bless you, my friend. I will carry you in my heart forever. Ken Wilber. Yeah, very sweet.
Yeah, it was a beautiful letter. And, in a lot of ways, it reminded me of a letter that Ken had written to Houston Smith, which I think was published back in 1999 in One Taste, maybe. And, it was a gorgeous letter. And for whatever reason, it really sort of seared into my heart. It was a letter where he was talking about the crumbling citadel, I think was the metaphor that he used. What's funny about that, Houston is still with us, isn't he?
I don't know.
Huh.
Yeah.
Maybe
it's a knowable fact.
Yeah, maybe I should do my research before before talking.
Yeah. Amazon, is Houston Smith still alive?
Houston Smith died on December 30th, 2016 in Berkeley.
2016.
2016.
Okay. Yeah, I should have known that. I'm going to edit all of this out.
No, what the hell? Good stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I remember back when you and I worked at the Integral Institute with Ken, and, we're talking 2004, 2005, 2006, we were doing the seminar, rocking and rolling. We had 30, 40 people working there. And Father Thomas was a real key character in the whole integral scene, especially then, because he was really productive, and he was productive to the end. It got in a spiritual way for sure. But what I think Ken loved about Father Thomas, and what he transmitted, what piece he brought to the integral puzzle, was the Christian piece.
Yeah.
And the whole contemplative prayer movement, which became and still is.
Yeah. Centering prayer.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Centering prayer. A spiritual path that has the flavor of second person.
That's right.
Where I'm seen and loved by Almighty God.
Yep.
And that is, that's a piece of it that how can you overvalue that? How can you thank somebody for giving you that?
Yeah.
So.
And Father Thomas, just in terms of my own sort of spiritual path or trajectory, or, however you want to look at it, people like Father Thomas, people like Brother David, Stendhal Rost, Paul Smith, these guys for me have had a huge impact in terms of sort of, almost grounding my adult spirituality with the spirituality of my childhood in a lot of ways. I've often described the process that I think a lot of Westerners take is, you grow up with an exoteric form of a religion, which is sort of just that outer layer, sort of the dogmas and the myths and, all of those trappings. And we tend to get disillusioned with that, particularly as we, start hitting, the rational wave of development. We get really disillusioned with the exoteric myths of our childhood.
Yeah, I could just interject. I could remember age 6 in our little preschooly kind of Sunday school thinking, the little Chinese kids go to hell?
Yeah.
That was the first crack. I patched that back up for a few years and then re-cracked when I was 12 or 13. But.
Yeah, well, for me, Jeff, I remember being 9 years old and laying in bed at night after Sunday school, going to Sunday school with my grandmother at a Protestant church, and thinking about the concept of heaven, of dying and going to heaven, and then the concept of forever, that when I go to heaven, I'm going to be in this place forever. And it scared the shit out of me.
Yeah.
I was trying to think rationally. I would imagine like, okay, so I'm going to go to sleep. I'm going to wake up the next morning. It's going to be today. And then I'm going to go to sleep. And just this constant recursive process.
Right.
And it all felt so huge. And I felt so tiny and insignificant. And it was the first sort of inklings of my rational brain kind of trying to wrap itself around. And it's funny because I actually see some of those same struggles in my daughter right now. My daughter will ask these really beautiful, big questions. Does the universe go forever? Will time go forever? And when I say, kind of, yeah, basically, sort of, in a sense, it terrifies her. It's like her little mind is too small to wrap itself around, the multitudes of infinity. And it's a beautiful process to sort of watch her little heart break and grow and break again and grow and wrap herself around it.
Well, it makes me think of that hideous verse from Amazing Grace. When we've been there 10,000 years, okay, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing his praise than when we first begun. It's like, all right, 10,000 years of singing his praise, and we've just begun.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like something I want to sign up for.
Right.
But it gets to that. The actual problem that you're talking about is that, time and space is a function of the cognitive mind.
That's right.
And the cognitive mind arises within a space that is infinite and eternal.
That's right.
And, time and space arises within, a bigger space that is pre-Big Bang. Pre-Big Bang.
That's right. And you spend your entire life wrapping your mind and your heart around that. And, just to continue sort of the trajectory I brought up, first, I think a lot of people, I think it's a common story. A lot of people grow up with this exoteric mythic religion that they start to sort of question and, get a little bit more cynical around. And then for a lot of us, that begins this journey. And that journey often takes us from exoteric to exotic. We start, sort of tuning into these other traditions that have been coming, being imported into the West, and imported in such a way by post-conventional people so that you can skip over sort of the myths and the dogmas and the trappings of those traditions.
Yeah, they leave them behind.
Yeah, right. And then that brings you right from the exotic into the esoteric, right? And then it's within that space when you discover sort of the esoteric union of all of these spiritual paths that you can then, come home to the tradition of your childhood. And that is the role that folks like Father Thomas and Brother David and Paul Smith, et cetera, have played in my own life, is they've helped me with that final step of being able to recognize, whatever insight I've gleaned, whatever little trickle of enlightenment I've discovered within these other traditions. Guess what? It's been waiting here the entire time. Right. I just had too much dust in my eyes, really, to see it.
Yeah. Hallelujah, brother. Right on.
Yeah.
And so I feel the same way. I'm grateful. Godspeed, Father Thomas.
Yep.
And there's some assets, and thank you. Yeah. And there's some assets on Integral Life that where Father Thomas transmits his beautiful realization.
Yeah, we were lucky enough to record a lot of material with Father Thomas over the last 15 years. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to say has really caught my eye on Integral Life is the interview that you do. You're doing something regularly with Ken Wilber called the Ken Show.
Yeah.
And of course, there's a pun there.
That's right.
Because Ken Show means realization in Zen Buddhism.
We like to have fun over here.
Yes, exactly. That's so integral humor. But yes, it's great. So you're doing it monthly, is it?
Yeah, it's monthly.
Yeah. And the last one you did was on a topic that has been so interesting to me and vexing, and it's clearly up in the internet and with the Sam Harris and the Jordan Petersons and then this and and that's this idea of free will. Yep. And are we agents of choice or are we slaves to determinism? What's that about? And God damn, if Ken didn't really sort that out for me.
Yeah, he did. He did a stellar job. And that's the thing about these Ken Show episodes we're doing. I feel like it's, for whatever reason, it is some of the best material that I think Ken has done in years.
I agree.
And that was I think our third episode. We've got another one coming up in just a couple weeks. And yeah, it was fantastic. And we've still got some more installments that we're going to be rolling out. I'm going to release a clip tomorrow where Ken and I discuss whether or not there's any practices that we can do to sort of increase the power and the scope and the half-life of our creative choice, to cultivate free will. And then we're going to follow up on that with a really, really cool and fun conversation about things like fate and destiny and synchronicity and whether or not there's any room in the integral view for, a lot of these terms that tend to be soaked in either sort of mythic or new age kind of connotations. Can they still be useful conceptually for integralists? So that was a really, really cool discussion. Yeah. And then finally, a little segment about what free will looks like from the stage of enlightenment and post-enlightenment. Does it go away? Does it sort of vanish into a poof of smoke? Because Ken often talks about how effortless everything becomes when you hit that sort of non-dual realization. Well, free will is sort of defined by the capacity to effort towards something. So what, how exactly does that land? Really, really great conversation.
Yeah, fantastic. And it's what integral can do. And it's so wonderful to see such a virtuoso performance in a way, because I've been listening to Sam Harris and I'm talking to Joe Rogan and I'm trying to sort it out. I think I might do an episode on it. And, as I guess I would have expected from Ken, an integral view sort of it doesn't sort of, it does. It includes both. It just teases it apart. Which part of our behavior and our being is automatic, is karmic? It's basically the result of cause and effect, and this whole cascade of cause and effect actually since the Big Bang.
That's right.
Right?
Yep.
And then what part of it is the creativity that actually is available to every moment, which is why the universe isn't just still a big blob.
Yeah.
And that there is something besides the second law of thermodynamics. And in a sense, the universe is winding up in terms of consciousness as it winds down in other ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so this both thing really comes online, and it was great. And I wanted to play a segment, if I might.
Oh, cool.
That I really liked. And you were great too, Corey. I mean, that's the other thing I want to say is that you brought Ken out in a way and also set the scene and set the frame, which I'm going to ask you to do actually in a minute, in the way that you did it. But this is what Ken had to say about this both and kind of thing. And it's right after he talks about Alfred North Whitehead, who's
Mm-hmm.
one of the philosophers certainly in the integral lineage. And that Whitehead says, in order to get a universe going at all, we need three things: the one, the many, and the creative advance into novelty.
Yes.
And so that's where we'll pick this up from Ken, where he's taken by that third one, particularly
Mm-hmm.
the creative advance into novelty. So what we're going to do, we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. And tell me if it's not working, Corey,
Okay.
but I think it will. Share. Nope.
Just make sure you tick the share audio.
I did.
Beautiful. I see it.
You see it? Here we go.
For Whitehead, he had what he called three ultimates. These are three things that you had to have before you could even get a universe up and running. And the first one was just the one.
Mm-hmm.
The next one was the many. And then the third one was what was so interesting, the creative advance into novelty. And that's such a brilliant thing to say. Okay, this is inherent in the universe, because if you actually sort of stand back and look at the direction of the overall universe and see, okay, which direction is that actually going? It's not winding down, it's winding up.
Right.
You get more and more complex entities. You get more and more self-organized entities. They have a greater degree of wholeness and unity. They have greater self-organization, and it appears greater consciousness. So that's unmistakable. You can't miss that. And so Whitehead simply said, right, that's the fundamental factor. And he's not getting that from the second law of thermodynamics. He's getting it from an absolutely obvious look at how evolution actually operates.
Mm-hmm.
So now,
Firing on all cylinders, man.
Yeah, really true.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you set up the interview, you talked about how did you put it? There was the two big categories of free will that we talk about.
Yeah. So, when I asked the question, when I do these talks with Ken, because I've known Ken for a while, I try to anticipate what his response to a given question will be. And in order to sort of deepen things so that Ken doesn't feel like he has to give, an integral 101 kind of lesson, what I do is I try to bake some of those responses into the question itself, which is why it can take me like 15 minutes to ask a fucking question before he starts talking. But so I had the sense that in this conversation of free will, he would go to creativity, and he would go to the first person perspective of interiority, and how both of these are themselves baked into the universe. But when I thought about Ken, bringing out the classics in a certain kind of sense to talk about that, to me, it felt like those were necessary ingredients for free will, but not quite enough to result in free will.
And those two things, again, Corey, being
creativity, the creative advance into novelty.
Okay, so every moment has a chance for something new to happen that has never appeared in the cosmos before.
That's right.
All right, so that's the advance of the novelty.
Yep.
And the other thing is interiority.
Yep. And the fact that interiority goes all the way down. And, so this
Right.
is largely a response to, a lot of the Richard Dawkins and, those types of guys who tend to reduce all of reality to third person objects. And they see consciousness as this illusion of interiority that is sort of the byproduct of the chemicals that are, sloshing around between your ears. And, and Ken, I know, has a very different take on that. And it was within that frame that I wanted to have this discussion about.
And let me just share something about this idea of interiority and, in a sense, consciousness or real proto-consciousness that goes all the way down to atoms and quarks, so that they have little. Ken says you wouldn't want to say they have feelings. You wouldn't want to say they have consciousness in the way we think of it. I actually prefer to think that they do. That atoms have little tiny feelings and little tiny consciousnesses. But it's poetic. But so I'm watching this show that's on PBS called Closer to Truth, which is a great show, and I want to feature it at some point. But it's this philosopher, scientist who goes around and talks to different philosophers about different philosophical issues. And so he's talking, I'm forgetting who it was, but it was one of these big guys, John Sears, I want to say, or something, who is talking about the panentheistic view, where that everything has consciousness. And he says, but that's obviously not true, because my belt buckle doesn't have consciousness.
Right.
And I thought, is that the level of understanding that you have of this? And the integral understanding of this, the holonic understanding of this, is that each of these building blocks that create everything. So
that's right.
Quarks to atoms, atoms to molecules, molecules to cells. These are the things that are the keepers of the interiors.
That's right.
And
he's right. His belt buckle is not conscious.
No, it's not. It's a bunch of things that are together, which
Ken says it's a heap, not a whole.
Yeah.
Yep.
A heap, HEAP, not a whole in terms of a series of nested holons.
That's right.
So that's a really important concept in integral theory.
Yep. Yeah. Foundation. Yep.
Yeah. So that's the thing that has some degree of creativity are the holons.
That's right.
So yeah, and I always think of the great quote by the great physicist Richard Feynman, who was talking about the movement of atoms, and he says the best way I can describe them is they're playful. Because nothing else, none of the physics makes sense.
Yeah, playful atoms reminds me of frisky dirt.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. All right, so that was good.
Yep.
And that is that's part of the Ken Show, which is behind the paywall, which is why people should join Integral Life. And tell us about that. To do a little overt infomercial for a second.
Yeah. So if you join Integral Life today, you can get your first month for $1. That $1 will actually give you access to everything on the site. So all of Ken's content from the last 15 years. I mean, it's an astonishing amount of content. It's, I'll just say the same thing I always say. It's an embarrassment of riches. There's so much in there. There's so many gems. And I've always felt like, geez, man, any one of these presentations or dialogues or what have you could send someone's life off in a completely different direction. It's some really beautiful stuff in there. And so the way this works and the way the Ken Show works is you can actually watch the Ken Show for free. If you tune in on the Saturdays, it's usually the second Saturday of the month, sometimes the third, but usually the second. You can find a calendar on integrallife.com/live. You can actually watch the live webinars for free. We then take the recorded version of it, chop it up into a bunch of pieces, and then make that available for members of Integral Life. So it's one of the ways that we like to play with sort of abundance on one side and scarcity on the other. Giving people a nice on-ramp to hear some of his latest thinking, with no obligation at all. But it's also an invitation to sign up and to, help sustain our organization and allow us to continue producing this amazing content.
Yeah, because you and the people at Integral Life have a life to lead.
We sure do.
And, so that's
I've got a mortgage now, man. Come on, sign up.
All right, cool. Okay. So I have one more thought, or one more piece I wanted to feature, but is there anything else you would point out before we sort of close with this third piece?
Well, I guess two things. I mean, first off, we started the show talking about, the Integral Live platform. And it's been just about a year since we've launched it, actually. I think we're coming up on our 1-year anniversary of Integral Live. And, your show was the first thing that we did with Integral Live. And then we started to sort of, expand a little bit. We got Keith Witt doing a regular monthly show. We have Terry Patton doing a regular monthly show. Now we've got Ken doing a monthly show. Pretty soon, we're going to get Beena Sharma to do a monthly show where we're going to be looking at both ego development and her brand new extraordinary polarity practice, which really gets me excited as someone who's been studying the integral map for, my entire adult life. Beena's polarity management teaching, for me, takes this map, which you can look at on like a piece of paper and can feel almost inert in a certain kind of way, and it makes the model dance. That's my description of Beena's polarity application. It makes the integral model dance, and it's beautiful. So, we'll be hearing more from her. And, as Integral Live has expanded, it's funny because I'm a pretty lazy guy. I do a lot of things.
You could have fooled me.
Well, I do a lot of things, but a lot of things I do are in effort to sort of give other people an opportunity to do some of the heavy lifting here. So when I created Integral Live, I had this fantasy. I'm going to create this platform and I'm going to be able to just hand it over to people like Jeff and to people like Keith and and so forth. And they're just going to be able to get engaged whenever they want and talk to our audience whenever they want and get this going. 1 year later, as it turns out, Jeff Salzmann is the only guy who actually wants to learn how the technology works. Right? Which means he's the only guy who can do the show without me. So now I'm suddenly in the very awkward position of, I worked behind the scenes for the first pretty much 14 years of my career here at Integral. And now I'm like on the homepage every week. And, for all you out there, I'm sorry about that. It's just sort of, it's the end result. It's not something I ever wanted to do when you suffer from, all sorts of performance anxiety and imposter syndromes and all that. This was not my idea of a good time. But it's, because of the seat that I find myself sitting in, I feel like it's my responsibility to do the show and to, bring a spotlight to what some, really extraordinary people in our community are doing. So it's an honor to be part of it. And Jeff, I want to thank you because I wouldn't have nearly as much comfort doing this if I hadn't sort of, had the Daily Evolver as, almost my training wheels for the first, 6 to 9 months or so. And that was, really special to me. And the whole time we were doing it, you were giving me the feedback, Corey, I think you should be doing, your own show. There's all sorts of things that, that I'd like to hear you talk about. And, you really inspired me to sort of take it a step further. And I appreciate that.
Well, you are worthy.
Thanks, man.
And I always think of what Eleanor Roosevelt said. I think, who knows who said it, but it's like when what you have to say is more important than all your fears about saying it, then you just get on with it. And it's like you said, you're in the position, you know all these people, you have all these contacts, you're in the center of this thing, and you almost have to rise to it.
Yep.
It's your responsibility.
Yep. And I've gotten totally used to making a jackass of myself on live camera. So it's all good.
Yeah, it's all good. All right. So the one thing I wanted to also feature in this broadcast about what's new on Integral Life is a program that Ginny Whitelaw has done. And Ginny is really terrific, isn't she?
Oh, she's one of my favorite people.
So
She
she
really
came
is
along,
superior.
she's sort of new to the scene, so I hadn't really gotten the download.
Yes,
But
yes, sort of.
yeah, well,
Yep.
yeah, to me,
You're right.
you
Yep.
know,
Okay.
and I was really impressed when I looked at her. Well, first of all, her credentials,
Yeah.
her bio. She's a biophysicist with a PhD. She's a Zen master. I'm forgetting what lineage, but she has she's a real Zen master. She was a manager in NASA's space station program, and she's got a 5th degree black belt in Aikido.
Mm-hmm.
So
She originally wanted to be an astronaut.
is that right?
Yeah. What's funny is if you look at Ginny, she kind of looks like an astronaut.
Yeah.
She has that look, that like
Yeah.
Ohio kind of,
Well, it's also that white robe, it's a
Yeah.
little bit Star Trekky. But so anyway, I want to play a piece from her. She's did a program called Lead with Purpose.
Yes.
And you know what? My business was on leadership training. My original business was called Career Track Seminars. Some of you, I know you write me and say, I've been to your seminars way back when in the 80s and early 90s. And so I know my way around business training, professional development training. And this is new. This is new. This is what I would want it to be at this stage of human development, where we're looking at leadership and professional development, being the best you can be. It's not for everybody, but if that's what you want to do, then, she's bringing in all 4 quadrants in the upper right in terms of the energetics and the upper left. And I think a really, really beautiful integration. And here I'm going to play a piece from it. And so this is Ginny Whitelaw. And here we go. Oops. Here we go. You seeing it?
I see your notes for the show today.
Okay, so that's not what we want.
So you want it? Yeah, there you go. Exit. You probably just clicked on the wrong thing.
All right, so share desktop 2. How about that? Okay, there we go. Cool. Here we go.
We've been looking at this idea of purpose, your purpose, what it is you're trying to do in the world. And we've observed both that, first, purpose is really important to align your energy so that you can send it out into the world and can create value. That's our definition of leadership, your authentic self-expression that creates value. On the other hand, we know that the world isn't always accommodating of our purposes. It's a very fast-moving, complex, chaotic world, and sometimes it doesn't honor our agenda. So it's important that we can both have that clear intention and not get stuck, that we can be resilient and agile. And we're going to play with that idea much more here in Module 3 as we look at how leaders, how you turn energy into things that matter. Because truly, that's what we're doing. I mean, think about
She's
Right on.
exquisite.
Yeah.
And Jeff, you mentioned her background, and what I find really interesting about Ginny's background is every phase of her career has given her mastery in a different quadrant of her own self and her own life. I mean, this woman has genuine 4-quadrant mastery, and I think it shines through in her teaching, not only in the teaching in herself, but in the transmission of that teaching. And I think you just got a really beautiful little taste of that there, where she's able to take, profoundly impactful suggestions and practices and orientations, and is able to communicate it with such a beautiful simplicity and make it relevant. We call this Lead with Purpose, and it's a leadership course, but I think a lot of people get hung up on that word leadership. They tend to believe this is something for, a corporate boardroom or for CEO of a company, or someone who has sort of, a professional leadership role that they're playing in their lives. And it's not. I mean, every one of us is a leader in and of ourselves. We all, we all are the leader of our own spheres of influence, whether it's your family or your personal life or your hobbies, your friends, whatever it might be. Every day you have an opportunity to express leadership. And one of the things that is becoming increasingly clear to me in 2018 is that we need a fucking revolution in leadership. And it needs to come from all of us. And I think that, what we were able to create with Ginny offers a leverage point.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah. The thing that I love about her sort of thesis is that your authentic self-expression is what creates value, and that we want to have, get in the groove of that and have intention around that without getting stuck. And it's that always that thing about passion and non-attachment. And how could you have both of those at the same time? And she really has, I think, a beautiful transmission of that.
Yep, absolutely. And we just released a practice with her. It's an extended excerpt from the course. We have it on the practice page, the Integral Life practice page on Integral Life, of Ginny teaching what she calls the 4 energies. And this is almost a typology of our immune system. There are 4 different ways that we can sort of both take on and transmit energy. And she teaches, how, there are these 4 sort of, fundamental types of energetic posture, maybe you could say. And all of us tend to have one that we rely on, oftentimes over rely on. It becomes native to us. And then usually there's at least one of them that we're not quite so comfortable with. And, what she demonstrates is if we have the capacity to freely exercise any 4 of these as appropriate to sort of the situation, our ability to transmit confidence, to lead with confidence, to navigate the massive complexity that we're faced with, whether in our homes or at our jobs or, wherever you happen to be, is that much greater. And again, just she's an exquisite teacher. She's an even more exquisite human being. And I hope people, check out that practice and, really seriously consider signing up for the training, because I think what the other thing, Jeff, is I'm sure you're familiar with, a lot of the approaches to leadership tend to be, sort of from here up. It's very cognitive. And, Ginny's strength, I think, in this course is how she grounds all of this in the body. Right. I mean, it is an embodied leadership training.
No, I mean, it's a fundamental integral principle that the upper right, so our individual exterior, our bodies, are not just flesh and blood. They're these series of energy bodies. I mean, there's all kinds of ways of slicing and dicing and mapping them out, but they're real. And, to the degree that we can inhabit them and become conscious of them, become conscious of the energy bodies of other people, and there's a whole new world that opens up there.
That's right.
And she is a worthy transmitter.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
Okay, my friend.
Well, hey, Jeff, before we go, can I just mention one more thing?
You bet.
We are, 5 days away from the election on Tuesday.
Yeah, talk about a new a change in leadership, maybe. Yeah,
hopefully. And the one thing I want to say is, if you're watching this right now, if you're the type of person who enjoys watching dorks like Jeff and I, dorks like me talking to awesome people like Jeff, if you're that type of person, I really hope you are taking it as an imperative to show up and vote on Tuesday. One of the things I've been thinking a lot about, Jeff, is, in 2016, I'm not going to cast any judgment on this. You can be pro-Trump, you can be anti-Trump, what have you. But the simple fact is, in 2016, Donald Trump won with, 30,000 votes in the Electoral College spread across a handful of states.
In the popular vote.
That was the margin of his victory. He lost by 3 million votes, but that 30,000 votes in a handful of states was enough to give him the presidency. That was the tipping point. We have more than 30,000 people on the Integral Life mailing list, which shows how powerful your voice is and how necessary it is for you to use your voice and to show up on Tuesday or earlier if you're early voting. I don't care who you're voting for. Well, I kind of care who you're voting for, but not as much as I care about you showing up and fulfilling your civic obligation. I mean, take this seriously. Take this as a fundamental part of your own ongoing integral life practice. This is how we enact a better world together, or at least stave off a potentially really shitty world that could be right around the corner. And, but again, not casting judgments, vote for who you want, but just please vote. This is, I think, the most serious election of my lifetime. I am, you know, I'm just feeling a lot of gravity around this. And yeah, I hope everyone shows up and does their civic obligation.
Amen, Brother Corey.
Yeah, man.
All right. I agree. And I've done my civic duty.
Yeah,
so
baby.
It went in the mail yesterday. So, all right. Thank you, folks. Again, integrallife.com. Corey DeVos, editor-in-chief. integrallive.com for the live stuff. And thank you so much for being part of it.
Thanks for having me on, man. This has been a lot of fun.
My great privilege.
All righty.
Thanks, folks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.